All right, our next question comes from two of our listeners tracking on the same idea, and they're from Tammy and Nathan. So I'll read Tammy's first. So bear with me, Mike, while I read these questions. Okay. And she wants to know about Genesis 34, about God burying Moses' body where no man would find it, and Jude's account of the archangel Michael and Satan's conversation about Moses' body. So Tammy's question is, do you agree that although avoiding idolatry is a viable reason to hide the body, in light of the reality of today's DNA sciences, isn't it feasible to believe that God wanted to prevent mankind from obtaining Moses' DNA? I'd like to hear Mike's actual thoughts about this topic from the worldview in Jude's time, in contrast to our present-day worldview. In this day and age, in my faith as I understand it, I believe that being in the presence of God would have changed anyone's physical body. I believe Moses died because God revealed himself to Moses. Otherwise, after spending 40 days and 40 nights in God's presence, not even face to face, I would not be surprised if Moses' body, physical body, is still well preserved. And that's why God hid it. And Nathan also kind of echoes this, and he says, okay, the book of Jude, there is a reference to Michael battling over the body of Moses. Every time someone mentions the book of Jude, I can't help but wonder why they would have been fighting over the body of Moses.
Okay, well, I would say to start off, I don't, if we're going to go by the ancient worldview, this has nothing to do with DNA. They don't know what DNA is, for one thing, but even those of us now who do, I don't think that any of this has anything to do with DNA at all. I don't think in the case of Moses that his DNA was affected. You have to remember, let's take Peter, James, and John. They see the glory of the unveiled Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration. I mean, they're not changed in any way. That this is sort of a cause and effect thing that I don't think is valid. I do think the idolatry trajectory is important, that Tammy pointed out. I think that's really important based on the biblical behavior with religious relics like the bronze serpent, and even the behavior of believers afterwards. Relic worship in late antiquity and Middle Ages and all that stuff. But the shining of Moses' face is not a property of Moses' body as the result of a DNA change. It was an after effect of being in God's presence. And again, you have other people in the presence of God, again, the glory. And incidentally, the Transfiguration has clear touch points with glory passages in the Old Testament, again, by design to associate Jesus with the Old Testament glory. And again, there's nothing going on there as far as, some visual change. So I don't think Moses' body was altered in any way. I think this was a visual after effect, probably because of the number of days and all that stuff. I don't think Moses' body was or is preserved. I don't think it would matter other than the situation with idolatry. When it comes to Jude, this is actually really a convenient question. So it comes at the right time because what I'm going to say about this dovetails on to what we just covered with Ezekiel 38 and 39 in part 2. So if you haven't listened to part 2 of Ezekiel 38 and 39, you may want to do that so that you can process what I'm going to say here. But let's just start here with a small quote from Baucham's commentary, and this will kind of give you a flavor for the standard view, at least among scholars. Baucham has spent a good bit of time on the epistles of Peter and Jude, and he's an expert in Second Temple literature, so it's a good source. But I think he sort of under argues a point because he's not as familiar with the Old Testament context as we wish he would be in this case. So in his commentary on Jude 9, again, which is the relevant verse about this conflict between the devil and Michael for the body of Moses, he writes, the words refer, in Greek here, to a legal dispute. And specifically the word that he picks out, in Greek it says to diabolo, diakrinomenos, okay, in debate or in debate with the devil, in debating the devil. The diakrinomai, or diakrino, the lemma is the legal word in question. It is legal vocabulary used elsewhere in the Septuagint, for example, and in other Greek literature. He says the words refer to a legal dispute. The devil, in his ancient role as accuser, tried to establish Moses' guilt in order to prove him unworthy of honorable burial and to claim the body for himself, unquote. Now that I think reflects the standard view. I have a little bit of a bone to pick with that because I think honestly we can do better. But we're certainly going to be the beneficiary of Baucham's work when it comes to Second Temple Jewish texts that sort of track with this, with what I'm going to say, or that kind of lay behind it. Here's what I would say. Jude 9, again, is related. I think it is fair to say that it's part of a tradition, or borrows from Second Temple Jewish thinking that the Lord of the dead tried to claim the body of Moses. I think that's pretty obvious. The tradition, though Baucham doesn't seem aware of this, may extend from some of the elements we covered last time in part 2 of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Now think with me here, note that the place of Moses' burial has something to do with part 2 of our last episode on Ezekiel 38 and 39. Deuteronomy 34:6 says, "And he, God, buried him, Moses, in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day." End of quote. That's Deuteronomy 34:6. The description doesn't give us a precise location for the burial, but what it does say is interesting. The valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, sounds a lot like, and geographically corresponds to, the Valley of the Travelers, mentioned in Ezekiel 39:11. Now, if you listen to the last episode, I read a portion of the DDD entry on travelers, and I'm going to read this again, this little bit of it. DDD says, "The Valley of the Ovarim," okay, that's the word for travelers, "the Valley of the Ovarim is located east of the sea," in verse 11, Ezekiel 39:11. And we said, this is me interrupting now, we said the sea here is likely the Dead Sea, so it's in Moab. Okay, it's in that part of the world. It's in Transjordan. The Valley of the Ovarim is located east of the sea, again, which is probably the Dead Sea. So it was part of the Transjordan. This is a region which shows many traces of ancient cults of the dead, such as the megalithic monuments called dolmens, and place names referring to the dead and the netherworld, namely Ovot, which means spirits of the dead, and Peor, which relates to the Baal of Peor, the Baal incident there, because Baal is the Lord of the dead, and Avarim, Ha'ovarim. Okay, the place name Avarim, we talked about last time, how that likely, again, is related to or is named after Ovarim, the Valley of the Travelers. And who were the travelers? Again, you'd have to listen to the last episode, but basically this has to deal with this location being associated with the realm of the dead and the passing over to the realm of the dead, and that place was where the Rephaim were. Again, it's in the Transjordan. There were Rephaim, giant clans there. The giants are the spirits, the spirits of the dead giants or the demons, and all this kind of stuff. All this whole matrix of ideas again is in play. I would suggest in this episode, it's part of the backdrop to understanding Jude 9 and the struggle over the body of Moses. Now, Ovoth and Avarim, again, just by way of summary here, were places associated with the realm of the dead and the Rephaim. It seems possible, to me anyway, and I would say it's even reasonable, that Moses would have been buried in the place associated with the realm of the dead, in this part of the Transjordan. This is the gateway to the realm of the dead. Well, we're going to bury him there, or God buries him there. The Rephaim were part of that underworld. Everybody goes to the underworld. Everybody dies. Again, you have to think like an Old Testament person here. Okay, you have to think like the Old Testament person. So, okay, he's right on the doorstep here. Let's bury him here, because this is the gateway to the netherworld where we all go. We all go to Sheol. Now, it was the hope of the righteous to one day be removed from the grave, okay, to be taken out of Sheol. So Sheol, again, all these terms, and we've talked about this many times on the show, terms like hell, terms like Gehenna, terms like Sheol, terms like the Valley of the Ovarim, okay, all these terms they're sort of linguistic or verbal necessities for us. They describe a place that actually, in reality, the spirit world does not have earthly latitude and longitude. These are places associated with death and where the dead go. Again, for whatever reason, we can't necessarily completely capture the reasoning behind, some of these terms and the places, but words like heaven and hell, and we still use words like passing over and all that. We do that because we're trying to describe the transition of the embodied life in this world, the world we know, the world we inhabit, and a world that is for the disembodied, or a different kind of body, or the spiritual place, the afterlife. And the only way we can describe that is to use terms of place and terms that involve latitude and longitude as though they were places. Okay, so this is what we've got going on here. So it shouldn't shock us that Moses winds up getting buried in a place that was associated with the passing over from this life to the next, the realm of the dead. Well, why would God send him to hell? God isn't sending him to hell. Okay, God is burying him. He's taking Moses' life, okay, if you want to put it that way. It's time for Moses to die or to depart from this world, if you want to resist the conclusion that Moses died, and some people want to argue that, but whatever. God is removing him from this terrestrial world and putting him in the next world. Okay, I think you have to conclude more than that because there's talk of a body here, but I'm trying to be generous here. So we've got a situation where it's time for Moses to depart into the next life, into the afterlife. Now, in the afterlife, there are good parts and bad parts. In the spiritual world, we still think this way today, even though we have a New Testament. We go to the spiritual world. Okay, the body, the soul, spirit separates from the body. We die. We go to the spiritual world, and that there are good parts to that. There's a good place and there's a bad place. Again, we use the same kind of descriptors here as the point. And so, if we look at the passage in that way, Moses, again, his death, his departure, is associated with the valley of the Overeem, the realm of the dead. Now, let's go a little step further. I would say if you're looking at it that way, it is in turn quite understandable if there arose a Second Temple tradition about the body of Moses. Again, arguably Moses is the central figure of Israelite history. So if a tradition arose that Moses' body was contested by the Lord of the dead, in other words, the person in charge there, Baal, or Baal-zebul, again, Baal becomes the Satan figure, all that sort of stuff. The Lord of the dead, who in the Second Temple period in the New Testament is identified as Satan. Okay, it seems to suggest, though, that there was some sort of contention about not letting Moses pass to the good place. In other words, like to punish Moses, to contest, Moses' ultimate destiny. It seems reasonable that again, this idea could have arisen because of where Moses is buried and because of who else is there, okay, in this place. So he gets contested again by Satan, by the devil. In this time period, you see this, this tradition sort of develop. To me, that's understandable. Now, Michael was Israel's prince. He is the guardian of Yahweh's portion, according to Daniel 10 and Daniel 12. So he, in some sense, would be the logical candidate to go get Moses, to deliver him again from this threat, to claim the body of Moses for the eschatological land of promise. Remember, Moses didn't actually get to, inhabit the promised land. He got to see it at a distance. But he goes and claims the body of Moses for the eschatological land of promise, which is the domain of Yahweh. It's Yahweh's house. It's Yahweh's place. It's where Yahweh lives. Okay, and so what I'm saying here is it seems reasonable that this tradition about Moses, because he was so important, could have arisen because of the context of where he dies and where he's buried, and the associations with that place. So the idea of the tradition coming about doesn't surprise me really at all. Now, if this scenario is coherent in any way, and again, I'm suggesting that there's a lot to chew on here. I think it is coherent. Again, may not be perfect, but again, there's a lot to chew on here. Then Baucham's speculation about this having something to do with guilt, I think, is a bit misguided. It's kind of on target, but it also misses the point. Now, Baucham refers to Zechariah 3:2. This is the scene where the angel You have the angel of Yahweh, you've got the Satan figure there, Hasatan, you've got Joshua the high priest who's guilty and being accused, by the Satan figure. The problem I have with it is that the Satan figure of Zechariah is not the same as the devil in Second Temple Judaism or the New Testament. You don't have the Satan in the Old Testament sort of playing that role. You do have him as an accuser, okay, and Joshua the high priest in Zechariah 3, again, he represents the guilt of the nation. And of course, he's going to be forgiven because in Zechariah we're dealing with, coming out of the exile and all that sort of thing. But when it comes to Moses isn't responsible for that. So I don't know how you're transferring the guilt of the nation to Moses. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But again, this Bauckham tries to connect these two things, I think, because this is where you get Satan vocabulary that might be useful to, understanding Jude 9. But that's the part of his, and again, probably fair to say a majority argument. That's the part that I'm just saying doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Moses isn't being accused of any unrighteousness like Joshua the high priest. Anyway, so on the positive side, Bauckham does marshal some really interesting parallels to Jude 9 in pseudepigraphical texts. Again, and these could date anywhere from a couple centuries BC in the Second Temple period all the way to the first century. I'm just going to give you some references here because I don't want to, while I'm debating here, I'll read some of this because it's kind of interesting. But if you really want to get the full treatment here, you'd buy Bauckham's Word Biblical Commentary and 2 Peter and Jude, and you can get the whole thing. He refers to, for instance, Jubilees 17:15 through 18:16. Bauckham writes that this passage tells the story of the sacrifice of Isaac within the framework of a heavenly trial of Abraham, in which the prince Mastema, which is a Second Temple Jewish word for Satan, the Satan figure, appears as the accuser, arguing that Abraham's faithfulness should be tested. When Abraham proves faithful, it is the angel of the presence who on God's behalf intervenes to save Isaac in Genesis 22, while the prince of Mastema was put to shame, Jubilees 18:12. He also refers to something else in the Book of Jubilees. Bauckham writes, the Book of Jubilees makes further use of the theme of the contest between Satan and the angel, especially in chapter 48 of Jubilees, to illumine the career of Moses in the Exodus. According to Jubilees 48:2 and 3, it was the prince of Mastema, not the Lord, as in Genesis 4:24, or Exodus 4:24, who tried to kill Moses. So again, the Jubilees tradition, sort of subverts that. They don't want God to be killing Moses. They swap in the devil figure there to do that. And argues, again, Jubilees 48 argues that it was the angel of the presence who delivered Moses from the power of Mastema. Though Satan's motivation here, again, the Mastema is the Satan figure, though his motivation here plainly derives from his hatred toward God and God's people, it may be that the author still intends him to be seen in the role of accuser. It was Moses' failure to circumcise his son, Exodus 4:25, which put him into Satan's power, again, in this reading of the story. So I'm going to stop there. What Bauckham does is he marshals texts like this that pit the Satan figure, the devil or Satan or a Satan figure, against the angel of the presence or the angel of the Lord, and says, well, this might be the backdrop, the Second Temple Jewish backdrop to Jude 9. I think there is something to that, again, something to this idea, but I think we're sort of better off thinking about the geography here and what that would have telegraphed about the realm of the dead, the valley of the Ovarim and all that. That's an important element too. So what I'm suggesting to all of you listening is take the Second Temple material, again, for what it's worth. Again, there are some interesting, possible parallels or precursors to Jude 9, but you need to factor in some Old Testament material, I think, to get a fuller picture of what people, were thinking. And again, what they are thinking, I'm suggesting, is that, look, Moses was so important to the Israelites, such a central figure, that when he went into the afterlife, there was resistance to allowing Moses to join the Lord. Okay, that was an idea. Now, did that really happen? Jude, brings this up. So we have an inscripturation, we have an inspired, comment to this effect. So I would say, yeah, something happened like that there was resistance to Moses, being with the Lord after he died. What that looked like, we don't really know. Maybe some of these texts are helpful, but the idea isn't that quaint when you think about the geography of it.